welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm starting a vlog. I love doing vlogs, but I didn't really want to do weekly vlogs during the month of March because I did them all throughout February, but I have one book that I am reading throughout the entirety of March for March of the Mammoths, and I thought it would be fun to share my thoughts throughout as I'm reading it, and that book is Deronda by George Eliot. This is my third Eliot that I've read. I was introduced to Silas Marner when I was, I think, 10 or 11. I was pretty young, and I've reread it as an adult, and then I read Middlemarch for the first time last year. So I'm slowly dipping my toe into more and more Eliot. So I'm really excited to be reading this one. I really don't know the premise. I've only read the first couple of chapters so far, and we are following this young lady who is staying with some wealthy people, traveling with them, and she receives word that her family is ruined and she needs to go back and kind of like take care of them, and it will be a change of life for her and what she's accustomed to. We have already encountered the title character who is watching this young lady as she is gambling all of her money away wherever they're staying, and she feels greatly unsettled by his gaze because she feels like he's looking at her differently than everyone else who just tends to admire her, and so she wants to get to know him. But now she's got to leave, so she hasn't gotten to know him. So I don't know if at this point in the story if we're going to continue to follow her on her way home or if we're going to switch to Daniel Deronda and see what he's up to. So I just am really enjoying being back in George Eliot's writing. I feel like her writing requires a bit more of me than some other classics that I've read, particularly other Victorian classics. I feel like she's a bit more wordy than some of them, but also I just really love her writing. I already have a couple of quotes tabbed, even though I've just started. I'm only 2 chapters in. So I love this quote here that says, "The general conviction that we are admirable does not easily give way before a single negative. Rather, when any of vanity's large family, male or female, find their performance received coldly, they're apt to believe that a little more of it will win over the unaccountable dissidents." And I just love that. I think it's true. So I'm really enjoying already her observations on vanity, and that's kind of the other quote I have tabbed has to do with that as well. But I just wanted to share my thoughts, my very initial thoughts, having only read 2 chapters, and I'm going to check in throughout the month and let you know what I'm thinking. It's time to check in. I am now 233 pages into Daniel Deronda, so finally starting to make some progress. I'm almost done with volume 3, I think. So they divide into volumes or books. They're divided into books. So there's 8 books, and I'm almost done with book 3. So it felt like a really good time to check in. So far, most of this book has been very much backstory, because in the very first chapter, we have Gwendolyn seeing Daniel. They don't actually meet. They make eye contact and are interested in the other one while Gwendolyn is gambling. And then Gwendolyn finds out that her family's lost her fortune, and she goes back to her family. And it's interesting because she was traveling abroad and then she comes back, and I kind of missed the part where her coming back to her family. That's not where the story picks up next. Then we just get this whole backstory of why she ran off with this other family in the first place. I mean, they let her go with them, so it wasn't like this controversial thing for her to do that. But she had a guy that was really interested in her, and she was not really interested in him. She's very flirtatious and likes to, I don't know what the right word is. She likes to manipulate men around her. Like, she thinks it's fun to see if she can make them fall for her, but she's also like she doesn't really want them to fully fall for her. She wants them to admire her, but she's not interested in getting married because she doesn't want to lose that freedom. So she thinks she's finally found someone that she can marry, and he's going to give her the independence that she longs for because he seems like he's a husband that won't really prevent her from doing what she wants. And he's rich, so she'll have money to do what she wants. This part isn't spoilery, so I won't tell you what happens, but she discovers something and then decides she's going to run off, and then finds out that her family's ruined. So we have that whole backstory of her with this guy and just her experiences. And the first book is actually entitled The Spoiled Child, and oh boy is Gwendolyn spoiled. Like, she is obnoxious, but yet I can't bring myself to fully hate her because her family made her really who she is. She's been constantly petted by her mother. She has 4 younger sisters, and her mother does not treat her younger sisters the same way that she treats Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn basically, like, everything she does is perfect, and she's beautiful, and she's amazing, and that's how her mother feels. And so she's very spoiled and very, very full of herself. There's one point in the book where she's trying to decide what she should do now that her family's fortunes are gone, and she just like looks in the mirror and she's like, I'm so beautiful. And it's like, your world is like collapsing around you, and all you can think about is yourself. She's incredibly self-centered. So after we get Gwendolyn's backstory, we then get Daniel's backstory. And Daniel is not nearly as self-centered. I really like him so far. That might change, but he is just so kind. He has these fears / suspicions that he's actually illegitimate. He's being raised by his uncle, and his uncle's told him it's because his parents have passed away, and he thinks that there's some sort of stigma surrounding his parents and his birth. And so he feels like, okay, I think that maybe I was an illegitimate child of my uncle, and they just don't want anyone to say anything. So he kind of hears like whispers when he's a child about his situation. So we follow him growing up, and he's just so kind. He doesn't have like these great aspirations for himself the way that Gwendolyn does. He's like the polar opposite of her in so many ways. He goes off to school and has this opportunity to become really great at something, but he has a friend who's really, really struggling to get through and wants to support his family through his education. And he risks his own education to help his friend get good marks and support his family. And I'm like, that's so sweet. So Daniel has a great relationship with this family called the Mayricks. He has a mother, and then I want to say, I think it's 3 sisters. The last part of Daniel's backstory that we get to is he encounters this girl who's about to commit suicide while he's out boating, and he prevents her from doing so. He finds out that she's a Jewess, and she has run away from her father, and she's in search of her mother and brother. And she gives the whole long backstory to Mrs. Mayrick, who she ends up staying with because Daniel wants to bring her somewhere where she's going to be safe and people aren't going to judge her, while he can help her try to find her family. So that pretty much catches you up to where we are in the story without it being super spoilery, because I'm not even, like, maybe I'm about a third of the way through. So basically mostly what we've had so far is Daniel and Gwendolyn's backstories, and they're just so different. I think that Daniel was raised around much more opulence than Gwendolyn was, and their upbringings do have ties that go together. There's one particular person who kind of ties those 2 stories together, and you find that out that there's a connection, and I'm not going to get into that for spoilery reasons. But I just found it really, really interesting because the book is called Daniel Deronda, and we have sure spent a lot more time with Gwendolyn. At the point of the story that I'm in, the book that I'm in is called Maiden's Choosing, and it has more to do with Gwendolyn than it does with Daniel. And Daniel has only been mentioned a little bit at the beginning, but we're mostly following what is Gwendolyn and her family going to do now that they have lost everything and they didn't have a whole lot to begin with. As always, I'm just really enjoying Eliot's prose, so there are moments of just like deep thinking, because that's what Eliot does, that she has moments where she's kind of philosophizing a bit more, and then moments where it's much more plot driven or description driven. So she's got a mix of all those things, but I just love, love, love this description of when Daniel is out boating. It says, by the time he had come back again, with the tide past Richmond Bridge, the sun was near setting, and the approach of his favorite hour, with its deepening stillness and darkening masses of tree and building between the double glow of the sky and the river, disposed him to linger as if they had been an unfinished strain of music. Ah, I just love it so much. I love Eliot's writing. And even though this has been like really slow moving so far, I'm actually enjoying every single second of reading it. I'm not on schedule with my reading pace, and that's okay. I think I'm probably like 3 or 4 chapters behind where I want it to be right now, but it's been kind of busy and I don't have an audiobook for this one, so I'm reading it entirely physically. And I kind of like that because it's making me slow down and really, really sink into the prose and things that might just kind of wash over me. I'm actually spending much more time on. So I'm really, really enjoying it. But I just wanted to update you. I wanted to share that quote and kind of tell you where I am in the story, and I'll check in with you again soon. Deronda. I am cooking right along, as you can tell. I have a little over 100 pages left. I think it's like 120 or something. So I am partway through volume 4, book 7, which is The Mother and the Son. So I am only a couple chapters into that though, so most of my thoughts are going to be for previous sections, but I'm going to try to keep this relatively spoiler free. I'm not going to try to talk about any of the big juicy reveals that we have gotten in the past couple of sections. I mainly want to talk about like the thoughts and attitudes of some of the characters. Obviously there's a huge component involving Judaism in this story, which I think you would see from pretty much any synopsis, and I actually knew that going in. Having not read a synopsis, I knew that it dealt pretty heavily with Judaism. You see a lot of people in this book having very, very negative opinions of Jewish people, which I see a lot in Victorian literature. I am currently reading Oliver Twist in homeschool with my daughter, and so obviously there's a lot of anti-Semitic commentary in that book as well. So it's pretty common in the Victorian time period to have negative opinions. What I think is really, really interesting that Eliot is doing here is that she's actually showing more positivity with Judaism than other works of the same time period that I've read. However, it feels like a lot of the characters in this book, it kind of reminds me of Huckleberry Finn, in that with Huckleberry Finn, when he runs off and Jim, the runaway slave, is with him, at first he's like, well, he's just a dumb slave, just like all the other slaves, and he gets to know him as a human, and he's like, wow, he's like a real whole person. But instead of that, shifting the mindset of like, wow, maybe all slaves are people, Jim is kind of the exception. And the same kind of thing is happening here with a lot of the characters, and the character of Myra, who is a Jewish girl that Daniel Deronda rescues. And I get the sense a little bit less from Daniel Deronda than I do from some of the other English characters in this book. But they're almost like, wow, Myra's not like the stereotypical Jewess that we have met and seen. So, wow, she's the only one. It's like, that's kind of how they're acting, instead of like, wow, maybe we have completely taken and stereotyped an entire race of people, and maybe we were wrong. Again, I do think that Daniel Deronda has a bit of a more positive reaction than a lot of the other people in his life that meet Myra, but I do like how Eliot is actually portraying some positivity with Judaism. It's refreshing in a Victorian novel to see them not just be the villain and the bad guy and all of that kind of stuff. So we definitely have a couple of positive Jewish characters, and then we have some other Jewish side characters who are pawnbrokers slash moneylenders, and there's definitely like the implication that they are a bit oily and a bit greedy, and you know, their motivations are less than pure. But it's interesting because from a modern perspective reading it, I'm like, they're not acting that bad. Then we get into a lot of philosophical commentary on Judaism and the kind of the, do we assimilate into the culture that we currently live in so we can fly under the radar, not be looked at weird, not be persecuted, not have people have these stereotypes of us? Or do we cling to our ethnicity and our faith and be proud of that? And so it's really, really interesting, the conversations that Eliot is having here. And they're more, like I said, more nuanced than what I'm accustomed to seeing in Victorian literature. As per the norm, Gwendolyn is living in drama city. Like, everything about Gwendolyn is so dramatic in this book. And I'm sure that we're going to get to points where Daniel Deronda feels pretty dramatic as well. But overall, his plotline feels much more thoughtful and slow compared to Gwendolyn. What I'm really, really intrigued by is the relationship between Daniel Deronda and Gwendolyn. So I kind of have this thought in my head, this prediction that somehow they're going to end up together, but they are totally opposites, and I'm not really sure that they're a good match because Daniel's got his own stuff going on. He's too busy for Gwendolyn's nonsense right now at the point of the story that I'm at. But Gwendolyn, she doesn't love Daniel, and they're not trying to portray her as loving him, but I don't know if they're supposed to be this kind of like attraction. But the truth is that Gwendolyn idolizes Daniel. She has him on this pedestal and she likes him and wants to spend time with him because she feels like he makes her a better person, because he's the only person in her direct circle that's actually holding her to any sort of higher standard at all. As I've mentioned before, she grew up being petted and prodded and just like, oh, you're so perfect. And everyone had nothing but wonderful things to say about her. And so Daniel's actually like, you know what? You shouldn't do that. That's not good. And is actually one of the first people who has actually held her into any sort of check at all. Here's a couple of quotes that I feel like really illustrate how Gwendolyn sees Daniel. There was not the faintest touch of coquetry in the attitude of her mind towards him. He was not unique to her among men because he had impressed her as not being her admirer, but her superior. In some mysterious way, he was becoming a part of her conscience, as one woman whose nature is an object of reverential belief may become a new conscience to a man. Later, Gwendolyn says to Daniel in conversation, if you despair of me, I shall despair. Your saying that I should not go on being selfish and ignorant has been some strength to me. If you say you wish you had not meddled, that means you despair of me and forsake me, and then you will decide for me that I shall not be good. It is you who will decide, because you might have made me different by keeping as near me as you could and believing in me. So Gwendolyn has this kind of reverence for Daniel. I feel like she doesn't even see him as a real person. She doesn't see him as fallible in any way. She holds him to this like perfect standard, which first of all is unfair. And second of all, just, I don't know, like what kind of relationship is that if you're just looking at someone for only like thinking that they're only good and there's nothing bad about them, and then she's still not taking responsibility for her own actions. She's saying, I can't help but be bad unless you're near me, and if you despair of me, then I'm a hopeless case because you're the only one keeping me on any sort of straight and narrow, the only person making me have any regrets or rethink any of my selfish decisions that I've made before. So I feel like it's a really interesting dynamic that they have going on. I'm going to talk something that's kind of spoilery for just a moment. So you can skip over this section. It will be marked as spoilery and then you're good. So we have now met Daniel's mother in the part where I am in the story, which first of all, I just assumed she was dead because why would you not want to see your son if you're a mother? But she doesn't because she's selfish. And the way that she talks sounds exactly like Gwendolyn. So before Gwendolyn married Grandcourt, she wanted to marry him because he was going to give her societal rise, he was going to give her station and money. But in addition to that, she thought that because he was so attracted to her and he loved her so much, that she would have the freedom to actually do whatever she wanted to do, that she'd be able to manipulate him. Lo and behold, he's doing that to her. He has completely oppressed and subjugated her into this fearful obedience, and he's totally getting his kicks off of being able to completely control her and having this belief that he's like broken her rebellious spirit. So Gwendolyn's mother is talking, and she's saying that, you know, as a woman, not only was she oppressed as a Jew, but also as a Jewish woman, that like made an extra layer. And so she decides she's going to marry the person her father wants her to marry because he actually loves her. And she says, your father was different. Unlike me, all lovingness and affection. I knew I could rule him, and I made him secretly promise me before I married him that he would put no hindrance in the way of my being an artist. So it's the same kind of thing. And so it feels like Gwendolyn is a younger version of Daniel's mother, except that because she didn't get her way, it felt like it was a wake-up call for her. She's now had people tell her she's not all she's cracked up to be between Grandcourt and then also Klezmer, who is like the artist guy, telling her she's not good enough to be an actress or a singer, and people actually being honest with her as well, like Daniel Deronda. And so as a result, it's just really, really interesting. I feel like Gwendolyn marrying someone who didn't let her trump all over him, which is what Rex would have done if she had married Rex, actually maybe prevented her from going down the path that Daniel Deronda's mother did by continuing to be consumed only with self and selfishness. Of course, the jury's still out on how Gwendolyn is going to turn out and how the entire story is going to turn out. But I wanted to just let you know my thoughts. I'm finding like just a lot of interest in mulling over some of the themes that are here and some of the commentary that George Eliot is making. So I will probably have only one more check-in when I finish this book. So I will see you soon, and I'll let you know my overall thoughts. Hello friends, I have finished Daniel Deronda, and oh my, I really loved this book more than I was expecting to. So I'm going to talk some spoilery things and then talk final thoughts. So if you have not read this book and you don't want to be spoiled, skip the next section and we'll chat soon at the end. So I absolutely loved how the end of this book resolved. I was kind of uncertain about a few things. I was really, really concerned that Eliot was going to pair Daniel and Gwendolyn, and I felt like that wasn't a good match for reasons that I've already mentioned, that I felt like Gwendolyn saw Daniel as more of like a spiritual guide and like idolized him and put him on this moral pedestal. And that's not a good basis for a relationship. Not that Gwendolyn is great at choosing relationships, as is exhibited by her marriage to Grandcourt, but I thought something bad might happen to him, and I was kind of wondering when he drowned if Gwendolyn was responsible, but not entirely. I mean, I guess you could say that if she had thrown the rope sooner, perhaps he would have been fine, but either way, like, she did not actually push him overboard, which is what I was wondering the second I finished that chapter. I'm like, Anyway, I feel like Daniel and Myra ending up together is perfect. Like, seriously, I thought that they were such a good match, especially because there was a lot of discussion throughout the book of Jews if they're living among the Gentiles, should they hold firm to their faith and experience oppression and stereotypes and all this stuff? Or should they just convert? And you look at the Mayricks who are like, well, maybe if Myra continues to live with us, then, you know, she will convert and become a Christian and not be a Jew anymore. And that's kind of what they want. And I'm really, really glad that Eliot addressed that. So I just thought that that was really good that he didn't end up with someone like that. Myra didn't end up marrying Hans or something and then needing to convert to Christianity, or Hans insincerely converting to Judaism. I felt like that was a really good resolution of that. Plus, I felt like they were so good for each other. And I think that the moment where Daniel proposes to Myra is possibly one of the most romantic scenes that I've ever read. You see a lot of scenes in literature in general where there are these grand sweeping romantic gestures or just these perfectly beautiful moments of a proposal. And when does Daniel propose to Myra? When her father has stolen his ring and runs out to go pawn it to get money to gamble. And in that moment, Myra's so ashamed and so humiliated by her father's actions in front of the man she loves, who she thinks doesn't know that she loves him. She doesn't know that he loves her. And this is his response. But he, taking her clasped hands between both of his, said in a tone of reverent adoration, "Myra, let me think that he is my father as well as yours, that we can have no sorrow, no disgrace, no joy apart. I would rather take your grief to be mine than I would take the brightest joy of another woman. Say you will not reject me. Say you will take me to share all things with you. Say you will promise to be my wife. Say it now. I've been in doubt so long. I've had to hide my love so long. Say that now and always I may prove to you that I love you with complete love." And I was just like, oh my gosh, like that's true love, right? You don't just want to be with someone because of what they can give you or just like you enjoy being with them. He's like, I love you. Let me share in your shame and your humiliation. Not just your joys, not just your good times, not just me thinking you're beautiful or you're smart or whatever, but like, I love you so much that I want to share in the shame and humiliation that you're experiencing. And I'm just like, that is the most like romantic and most wonderful proposal maybe I've ever read. I also loved their wedding scene, of course, and the letter that Gwendolyn sends to Daniel is so poignant of the whole idea of like, I'm better because I knew you. So don't worry about me. Don't weep for me. Don't be concerned about me. Don't let me be a cloud on your day of happiness. And I felt like that was such a good contrast from the letter that Gwendolyn receives from Lydia Glasher, where she says, you know, you married him with your eyes open. You knew what you were getting into and you did it anyway. And it's this vindictive, spiteful letter trying to cast pallor on this relationship, which was doomed anyways, to be fair. And it didn't go well, so, and it wouldn't have, even if Lydia had not written that letter, but it casts that much more of this gray cloud over the relationship. And Gwendolyn has an opportunity to write Daniel a letter on his wedding day, and her letter is the complete opposite to the one that she receives. It's not trying to guilt trip him, it's not trying to make him feel sorry for her. Instead, you just see the growth of Gwendolyn as a person. I also loved that Gwendolyn didn't get neatly paired off with someone in the end. I felt sorry for her at the end because she was so miserable, though she was so much happier with her mother and her sisters than she'd been previously. But I'm glad that she didn't just get automatically shoved off on Rex or Hans or someone else. I actually think that she might actually be able to appreciate the love of Rex now, and it's clear that Rex still loves her. So it's kind of open-ended, and I like to think that at some point maybe Rex and Gwendolyn end up together, but I think it would have been too soon to just push that together immediately at the end. And so I liked that everything wasn't this neat, perfect pairing, because that's not real life. That's not how it works in life. Everything doesn't end up being perfect and happy all the time. But we do see quite a bit of happy endings in this book, and we see character growth. There is a tinge of bittersweetness to a lot of the things that are happening in this book. It's not just perfect happiness, perfect joy, everything is great, everything is wonderful. That's not what happens in this book, and I felt like that was true to life. After you experience the kind of trauma and horribleness that Gwendolyn experienced, you're not just gonna bounce right back and everything's gonna be fine. Okay, spoilery stuff is over, so welcome back if you skipped that part. Let me just talk to you about my overall thoughts on this book. So I adored this book. I loved it. It was an easy 5 stars for me. I think I liked it more than I liked Middlemarch, and it has to do with the resolution of the ending in this book and then the resolution at the end of Middlemarch. Those two are kind of, I didn't love everything about the ending of Middlemarch, but I loved pretty much everything about the ending of Daniel Deronda. I love how Eliot, she did this in Middlemarch as well. She takes people that feel real. They're not perfect people, and some of them are actually a bit unlikable. Gwendolyn is definitely one of those, and she shows this tremendous growth in who Gwendolyn is as a person. We see her as this nasty little spoiled brat who thinks everything is about her, and then her growth to actually kind of be taken outside of herself based on being in less than ideal circumstances. And so I'm so glad that we see her growth, but she's still not perfect at the end. There's still times where she's like, I'm still selfish. I still feel this way, even though I know that I should not. And I like that, because I think that even when we're growing as people and we've realized the error of our ways, there's going to be times where we're like, oh man, I'm not getting this right now, because growth isn't linear, right? You don't just see up, up, up. It's more like this, where you have dips where you fall back into who you used to be and who you're trying to overcome and be better than. And it's not going to be this perfect linear growth. And I think that Eliot just expresses that so well. She takes human beings that feel so real, because you read a lot of Victorian books and you see that there's kind of almost this moralistic tale behind them. So the evil people are like really, really evil, and the good people are like perfect little angels. And Eliot does not write that way. Eliot has like real flawed human beings, even the people you love that you're like, oh my gosh, I love them so much. Like I look at like the Mayricks, for example. Oh my gosh, I loved Mrs. Mayrick and her daughters and Hans, but especially Mrs. Mayrick and the daughters. I thought that they were so sweet, so wonderful, just welcomed Myra with open arms immediately and just loved her. But yet there still was revealed in them just kind of the prejudice and racism that they had against Jews, where they felt like she was the exception to the rule, and they were really, really hoping that she would convert to Christianity rather than being even more firmly entrenched in her Jewish faith. And so I think that Eliot did that on purpose to show that this is kind of like the most positive attitude we see towards Judaism in the Victorian era for the most part. George Eliot actually wrote a letter to a friend of hers, and I will link that letter in the description of this video where I found the article online, but she talks about the sentiments towards English Christians towards Jews and how she felt about that and how that was reflected in her writing of Daniel Deronda. But it says, as to the Jewish element in Deronda, I expected from first to last in writing it that it would create much stronger resistance and even repulsion than it is actually met with. But precisely because I felt that the usual attitude of Christians towards Jews is, I hardly know whether to say more impious or more stupid when viewed in the light of their professed principles, I therefore felt urged to treat Jews with such sympathy and understanding as to my nature and knowledge could attain to. And then she later calls the treatment of Christians towards Jews, that she's like, do they even know? Like, they act like they don't even know that Jesus was a Jew, and they make horrible jokes about Jews and they treat them terribly, and she calls it the worst type of irreligion, which I agree, because as Christians, even if we don't agree with another religion, and we have more probably in common with Jews than any other religion since Jesus was a Jew, but even beyond that, someone who believes something completely different than us, if we are marginalizing them and treating them illy, and that's not being Christ-like. You don't have to agree with someone to treat them with kindness and respect. And so it was just like really wonderful to read a book that wasn't just stereotyping Jews. Most of the time when I read Victorian novels, I've mentioned they villainize Jewish people, and they're often these evil, greedy, horrible people. Even the Jews that she portrays less sympathetically are people who then are shown that they took someone in and doted on him and took care of him when he was completely impoverished and had nobody. So even these people who are portrayed as kind of these more oily, greedy Jewish people still had redeeming qualities. I think in general there are some societal norms that are definitely pushed in this book. Obviously, the whole Jewish element, which I've mentioned, but in addition to that, we have almost like this role reversal of the genders in this book with Daniel and Gwendolyn for their time. Gwendolyn is like, I don't really want to get married. I want to be able to do whatever the heck I want, and I think a husband's gonna slow me down. And that is precisely her opinion at the beginning of the book, and by the time she finally does marry someone, she's like, I'm gonna marry this person because I can control them and I can get what I want. Meanwhile, Daniel doesn't really have that kind of view at all. He's much more emotional than we typically see from male protagonists in Victorian times. He's much more in touch with his emotions. There are scenes where he weeps and he has no problem expressing his feelings and emotions in a coherent way. And it's just really, really interesting to see the differences, because Gwendolyn tends to hide herself away and be closed off and not reveal how she truly feels to anyone until she meets Daniel and develops more of a relationship with him. I just thought that that was really interesting, because that's definitely not how you normally see men or women portrayed in the Victorian time period. I think maybe sometimes we can see some more boundary pushing women, but we don't usually see. Most of the men are just very masculine and they want to swoop in and save the day, and Daniel is a much quieter protagonist and more emotional. These feel like real people. They don't feel like a stereotype of a man or a woman in the Victorian time period. They feel like real people with real feelings, real emotions, real motivations, real lives, and that makes it so much easier to invest in the plot of this book. As I've said throughout the entirety of this video, George Eliot's writing is perfection. I love her. Oh my gosh, she's probably, I haven't said this before, but she's probably one of my favorite writers. This is only my third book of hers that I've read, but every book that I read, I'm just further solidified on how beautiful her writing is, both in her nature descriptions, but then the way that she writes human nature and feelings and growth is just like so poignant and beautiful. And I'm going to leave you with another quote. Does one who has been all but lost in a pit of darkness complain of the sweet air and the daylight? There is a way of looking at our life as an escape and taking the quiet return of morn and evening, still more the star-like outglowing of some pure fellow feeling, some generous impulse breaking our inward darkness as a salvation that reconciles us to hardship. So I'm gonna stop here because I could just keep going forever about how much I loved this book and appreciated this book, and I just, oh my goodness, I loved it so much. I'm so happy that I read this for March of the Mammoths, and I did finish it several days before the end of March. So go me, pat on the back. My edition that I have here is around 700 pages, but I've talked to some people that their editions are closer to 800 pages, depending on, you know, I guess probably maybe font size and page size. I don't know. But either way, this was for sure a mammoth, as you can see from all the tabs. I really love this book. I have so many quotes that are going to be going in my commonplace journal, and I can't wait for the next Eliot that I'm going to read. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments down below if you've read this book. What were your thoughts on it? What were your takeaways? What did you love about it, not love about it, etc. I would just love talking with you guys in the comments about any book that I read. Also, if you would like to see this format in the future of me vlogging my process of reading a longer book, I've been considering doing that because I have a lot of big books on the docket this year. So I'm trying to decide if I would like to do that and kind of have it be like the Tome Diaries because I am about to start Moby Dick as well, so that would be another fun one to do this with. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.